Hello, everybody. How are we doing? Are we ready and raring to go for the final 5 races of the season? I'm certainly ready. We've got another race coming up this weekend in Austin, but I thought it was about time that we kind of reflected on everything else that is set to go for the rest of the season. Obviously, with 5 races to go, Max Verstappen has already won everything. He's going to break every single record. We don't really need to talk about Max Verstappen anymore. You know, he's probably going to win the last 5 races of the season, but I don't really want to talk about him. You know, we've done it now. We've done it. He's the best ever. Fine. Absolutely good. But what I do want to talk about is some other different things that are going on and how we can actually really enjoy these last 5 races, even though it's probably unlikely that anyone other than Max Verstappen will actually go on to win anything. Hello, everybody in the chat. Hello, Tracy. Oh my God, my nerves. What's wrong, Tracy? What are you so nervous about? But, don't get me wrong. Max Verstappen deserves his plaudits. He deserves everything that he's got this season. He has been absolutely sensationally quick. I've been very, very impressed with everything that Max Verstappen has done. But I'd like to talk about everybody else. I'd like to talk about the rest of the field, your Fernando Alonso's, your Lewis Hamilton's, your Sergio Perez's, your Ferraris, your McLaren's, your Aston Martin's. We're going to delve into all of it today, and we're going to talk about what's left in this 2023 season for the rest of us. Hello, Roger. How we doing? So, effectively, I'm going to call this the what to watch. And what I want to do is I'm going to go through 5 different predictions for the rest of the 5 races this season. It sounded like a good idea at the time. So then I'm going to get your opinion. I'm going to get your opinion in the chat and through various polls as to whether or not something is going to happen or one driver is going to beat out another driver. And then I'll give you my prediction as well for the last 5 races. And to be fair, there's a few of these where I could be convinced either way. There's a few predictions that I've made, and then at the end I've been like, could definitely go either way. Could definitely go either way. Max not winning. Wow, definitely Sergio or Piastri. I haven't got actually a prediction on Piastri, but I feel like that is a good one to start. First and foremost, I asked you guys in the chat whether or not you're looking forward to the rest of the season. And I'm glad that 100% of you are looking forward to the rest of the 2023 season. We'd be quite upset, wouldn't it, if nobody was looking forward to the final 5 races of the season. But I'm glad that's 100%. We can end that poll there. We're happy that 100% of us are ready and raring to go. I hope Lando gets a win. Lando we will definitely be talking about. Shall we talk about the 5 categories, the 5 predictions that I am going to make for you? First and foremost, Hamilton versus Sergio Perez. Who is going to come out on top in second place in the Drivers' Championship? Remember, Red Bull have never had a 1-2 finish in their history. You think about how dominant that Sebastian Vettel era was, 4 championships in a row. We're now about to see Max Verstappen, Max Verstappen win 3 championships in a row and continue his absolute dominance. But Red Bull might still not have a 1-2 in the championship if Lewis Hamilton can come and ruin the party. I also want to talk about Mercedes versus Ferrari for second place in the constructors standings. Mercedes have somehow been the second best team on the grid this year, even though I can't really think of too many races where the Mercedes car has been the one I've been like, that one is second best. Like McLaren have been really good. Aston Martin have been really good. Ferrari as well have been exceptionally quick in some races. But Mercedes have just been pretty good throughout the entire season, have themselves in second place right now. Can Ferrari step in and take that second place from them? I also want to talk about the battle from 4th to 8th, because I think that is a real battle that still has to play out in these last 5 races. I know that Fernando Alonso is 4th by a considerable margin right now, but you've got Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, and George Russell all in that battle underneath, what is the order of those drivers going to be? So Alonso, Sainz, Leclerc, Norris, and Russell, who finishes 4th, who finishes 8th, and how do those 5 line up in between? We're also going to talk Aston Martin versus McLaren, which is probably one of the easier ones to predict, but I'll get into why we need to talk about Aston Martin versus McLaren and the ripple effects, if you will, sorry, James Lawrence Walcott, of what's going to happen depending on whether Aston Martin or McLaren finish in 4th place in the constructors and how that affects the rest of the grid. And then finally, of course, towards the back of the pack, I want to talk about the Constructors' Championship. I want to talk about the 7th place finish in the Constructors' Championship that is available to Williams, Alfa Romeo, Haas, and AlphaTauri. Should we throw AlphaTauri in there? We might as well. And the impact, again, on the other drivers involved in that. The impact on Logan Sargent, Daniel Ricciardo, and the way that that Constructors' 7th place can really have a huge impact on the 2024 season. So even though Max Verstappen has won the championship and there are 5 races still to go, as you can see, these 5 battles are going to be absolutely massive for the rest of the season. So I'm really, really excited to get into these and give you my thoughts and actually get your thoughts back. Because as I said, there's quite a few of these where I've made my predictions, but as I've been doing it, I've ummed and ahed and I've swapped backwards and I've made changes. And even 10 minutes before I went live, I was making some little adaptations because today I was kind of thinking about this stream and I was thinking, is that going to happen? Is this going to happen? There are so many things that could affect all 5 of these, but let's delve into it and let's talk about Hamilton versus Perez first, because right at the top of the driver's standings, as I said, a huge deal for Red Bull. And like, surely, considering how dominant Max Verstappen has been in 2023, they have won all but 1 race, have Red Bull. Carlos Sainz is the only non-Red Bull driver to have won a race this season. It would be absolutely ridiculous to have possibly the most dominant season in Formula One history and not end up with both of your drivers finishing 1 and 2 in the Drivers' Championship. But that is where Red Bull and Sergio Perez are currently at this season. It would be the first ever 1-2 finish for Red Bull in their history. And Sergio Perez has actually made that way more difficult than it feels like it should have been, because he only has a 30-point lead over Lewis Hamilton going into the final 5 races of the season. I mean, it just feels so tight between them because Lewis Hamilton, realistically, in Qatar, probably would have picked up a podium finish. And this would have been even closer. Like, this would have halved from 30 points to possibly 15 points in Qatar had it gone slightly differently, because Sergio Perez would have also been bumped out of the points completely. Like, this is absolutely crazy. The only thing I think that plays in favor of Sergio Perez is that we are getting towards the end of the season where there are some races that suit him a little bit better. And Sergio Perez actually had a points gap in the summer break between himself and Lewis Hamilton of 41 points. So surprisingly, Lewis Hamilton hasn't closed that gap very much. At the summer break, Sergio Perez had 189 points. Lewis Hamilton had 148. So it's actually closed in, but not as much as you thought. Like, 11 points has only been the swing in Lewis Hamilton's favour. I thought that would have been much, much bigger. For some reason, I thought Lewis Hamilton was much further behind Sergio Perez, for one. And secondly, that Sergio Perez had a much more atrocious second half to the season compared to Lewis Hamilton. But actually, the swing has only been 11 points. But as I said, had Lewis Hamilton finished on the podium in Qatar, that could have cut down and could have been like a 26-point swing rather than just an 11-point swing. But those are the things that have to go in your favour. I think the problem Sergio Perez faces here is it has a real detriment on their future. Sergio Perez has his spark back. That is very true. Like, he does seem like he would fit these final races a little bit more. It's back to kind of street circuits a little bit. It's back to Mexico, obviously, his home Grand Prix. You'd imagine him doing a lot better there and maybe refinding his mojo with the crowd behind him and really pushing him on. But I feel like Sergio Perez desperately needs his performance to just, like, be on an even keel for 5 races, because at the minute he's just had so many ebbs and flows. He's had so many races where it's looked like it's going to be okay and then it's just fallen off, or he's started off really low and then he's actually saved a race by finishing in the points, but probably should have got a podium if he'd have just finished, like if he'd have just started somewhere where he should have done. So it's kind of a weird that Sergio Perez is so desperate right now to just get a constant, just get some form that shows consistency and build a platform for 2024. I think this is so huge for Sergio Perez going into 2024, because amongst, you know, a lot of Formula One fans, we're talking about the fact that whether or not he'll be replaced. I think the talk is a lot of the time about whether or not he'll be replaced in 2025. I think most people have come to the conclusion that he'll probably be in that Red Bull seat in 2024. Like, I imagine he will at least start the season for Red Bull in 2024. If it's absolutely atrocious, and again, we saw this with Nick De Vries, it gets 10 races in and he needs changing, maybe Red Bull will do that. But I think they will start with Sergio Perez. So he needs, in these last 5 races, to really build a platform for himself and see whether or not he can just move forwards into the 2024 season with at least a little bit of confidence. Like, as I said, imagine calling this the most dominant season from a team ever, and the drivers finish first and third. Just doesn't seem quite right. And Sergio Perez is in a hole right now. He has absolutely no confidence in the car, but has time to do that. And I feel like there's almost less pressure on him in these last 5 races, because Max has already won the championship. Red Bull have already won the constructors. He can kind of put that out of his mind a little bit. He doesn't need to worry about the championships anymore. He doesn't need to worry about Max Verstappen anymore. And you can just solely focus on him. I think Sergio Perez needs to get to the point in his mind where he realizes it's not about fighting Max Verstappen. It's about being the best of the rest. Like, I know that at the beginning of the season, he was talking about the possibility of leading the championship. And had he, you know, held on to that performance in Miami, he would have been leading the Drivers' Championship after 5 races. And we were talking about Sergio Perez and the possibility of him battling. But actually, Sergio Perez just needs to get into his head that Max Verstappen was just so far clear of him this season, but there is still a possibility of him being second best. Plus, Daniel Ricciardo being back from injury, I know that kind of feels like a negative for Sergio Perez, but I also feel like that can go in his favor, because there's a little bit less talk about Liam Lawson. And the Liam Lawson talk kind of elevated the pressure on Sergio Perez. It was a little bit of a domino effect. It was like, oh, so Liam Lawson is so good, so Liam Lawson deserves an AlphaTauri seat. Well, the only AlphaTauri seat is Daniel Ricciardo's, so therefore, what do AlphaTauri do with Daniel Ricciardo? Oh, they'll put him in for Sergio Perez. Now that Liam Lawson is kind of back in the cupboard, we can talk about Daniel Ricciardo at AlphaTauri, and AlphaTauri keeping Daniel Ricciardo in that seat, and therefore Sergio Perez actually remaining. Obviously, Daniel Ricciardo will be doing everything he possibly can to prove to AlphaTauri and to Red Bull that he's the better long-term second driver to Max Verstappen in that Red Bull seat. And I think Christian Horner really wants Daniel Ricciardo back in that Red Bull seat as well. And whilst Daniel Ricciardo is there, there'll be a little bit of pressure on Sergio Perez, but less pressure now that it's not Liam Lawson. And whilst the pressure is still on him, I feel like it does open the door for Lewis Hamilton to finish second in the championship a little bit. So I'm going to get your thoughts now. I'm going to throw a poll up in the chat, and then I'm going to share my prediction. So who finishes second? Is it Lewis Hamilton, who is currently behind, but has probably been on the better form this year, plus the Mercedes car is upgrading, plus he's coming into a couple of Grand Prix that he's very, very good at? Or will it be Sergio Perez? Will Sergio Perez still hold on to that second place in the driver's standings? I'm going to give you a few minutes to just get your votes in, and then I'll show you my predictions. And try not to, have British bias on this. Try not to have British bias. 50-50 currently. 50-50 after 2 votes. We are indecisive when it comes to the predictions. If Ferrari gets bad finishes, I feel like that does open the door to Lewis Hamilton as well. We'll get on to Ferrari and Mercedes in a moment. If Sergio has his spark back, I would love it. Strong possibility. Oof. Strong possibility. Strong words. Wow, we are properly 50-50 on this. Okay. Okay. Well, I'll leave the vote up for a second. I'll share my prediction with you. I think Sergio Perez is just about going to hold on. I think Sergio Perez will just about hold on to that second place in the driver's standings. And there's of Sergio compared to Sergio Perez. And actually, I think that 30-point gap gets smaller to Sergio Perez, but I don't think Lewis Hamilton has enough to overcome. And I don't think Lewis Hamilton has enough to really kick on and be able to take that position away from Sergio Perez in that sense. Whereas Sergio Perez will be good in Mexico, in Vegas, in Abu Dhabi. Like, there's 3 races there where Sergio Perez should thrive and Sergio Perez's performances in that Red Bull car should improve. So I think those 3 races are really, really important for Sergio Perez. I think Lewis Hamilton has Austin and Brazil. So that's the only way I can see it going, is Sergio Perez should have the better in 3 out of the 5, but then Lewis Hamilton will absolutely fly in 2 out of the 5 races. Therefore, I think it's going to be quite close. But I could see, a DNF for Sergio Perez somewhere in there, and that could really turn the tides. I think the fact that Lewis Hamilton had that DNF in Qatar really played into Checo's favor, and the only way that Lewis Hamilton will really overcome this 30-point deficit is if he gets a really, really solid finish somewhere and Sergio Perez somewhere has a DNF. Now, I think Lewis it's in Sergio Perez's court, right? Because he has the points lead now, he has that. And you guys are just about agreeing with me, to be fair. It's close. 38 to 62%, but Lewis Hamilton taking it. Sergio Perez taking it 62 to 38%. Interesting. Okay. Well, let's delve into the second one, the second prediction that we need to make. And that is Ferrari and Mercedes. So talking of Lewis Hamilton obviously having a couple of races, Austin and Brazil, where I think he's going to absolutely fly. Will it be enough to keep Mercedes in front of Ferrari? The current point gap between these two closer than the gap between Perez and Hamilton, just 28 points. And to be honest with you, Mercedes should probably have sewn this up a couple of races ago. Like, Mercedes have thrown away quite a few points in the last 2 or 3 Grand Prix because of their battles between teammates and because of the pressure that's been on both George Russell and Lewis Hamilton to perform in that Mercedes car. They've thrown away a considerable chunk of points. I would say a lot of points compared to Ferrari. But Ferrari look revitalized, especially since the summer break. They've been regularly closing this gap to Mercedes and using the second half of the season not only to develop for 2024, but also look probably more complete than they have in a very long time in the Ferrari garage. I know they started the 2022 season incredibly well, but I'm actually more impressed with the Ferrari now than I am with the Ferrari at the beginning of the 2022 season. I think they look so much better and so much more put together. And they've changed a lot of their processes. Like Carlos Sainz says himself, like, they've changed the way they approach a race weekend. It felt like before they were rushed, they were panicked, they didn't really know what to do when they were setting the car up. They were always a bit 50-50 on things. But now it feels like Carlos Sainz and the Ferrari team have really clicked. Charles Leclerc, I feel like, has had a little dip in form, but is now starting to look better and better and better. And I think it's because of those process changes that Ferrari have put in place. And like, Ferrari are the only team outside of Red Bull to get a win this season, yet Mercedes is still in front of them. I think is a really impactful thing when it comes to this kind of dynamic. Although Ferrari seem closest to Red Bull come 2024. Like, no, I mean, even though Mercedes are second in the Constructors' Championship, and they've had a really good year, and Lewis Hamilton has been exceptionally good. That's why Lewis Hamilton is in battle for second place in the Drivers' Championship. Mercedes as a team and as a car, they just don't quite have it for me. There's something missing. There's something not quite just that final puzzle piece isn't slotting into place. Whereas Ferrari, I feel like there's so much positivity around them right now that they could actually use that positivity and really pump up towards the next season. I mean, Mercedes have opened the door effectively. As I said, Mercedes should have picked up a lot more points over the last 3 or 4 races. Mercedes still feel like they have the better all-round package. Although Mercedes actually themselves are really worried about McLaren right now. There was a James Allison interview where he was discussing McLaren at length. And I think Mercedes are really, really worried that if there's going to be a team to kind of drop out of that top 3, like out of the big 3, they're edging on that. They're teetering on that, because if McLaren and Ferrari start next season how they have started the second half of this year, like post summer break, Mercedes are in a little bit of trouble, because George Russell had that mid-season dip that seems to be behind him a little bit now, and we'll talk about George Russell in a bit more detail later as an individual. But they have the issue of their drivers, because even though George Russell has come out of that mid-season dip, he's now battling with his teammate way too often. Way too much. Like, they have taken so many points off of one another in Japan. Like, you could talk about the fact that Lewis Hamilton probably should have been let past a lot earlier. Singapore, he hits into the wall as George Russell. And then last time out in Qatar, they also hit into each other. And Mercedes miss out on all the points that Lewis Hamilton would have accrued in that. So I just feel like Mercedes might end up regretting that collision between their 2 drivers in Qatar, because that cost them a considerable amount of points. Imagine if, instead of a double McLaren podium, it's a double Mercedes podium with Max Verstappen winning, possibly Lewis Hamilton second, George Russell in third. This is basically done and dusted. Nobody's really talking about Mercedes and Ferrari, because the points gap between them would just be too much, because Carlos Sainz obviously had that did not start, and it was just an open goal for Mercedes to take home a huge chunk of points. But any more slips from Mercedes definitely lets Ferrari in. So I want to know what you think. Ferrari or Mercedes for second place in the constructors standings? Again, I'll get a little poll going. Actually, maybe I should start the poll before we start discussing. Boop. Little poll. Ferrari or Mercedes? Who comes out in second place in the constructor standings? For my prediction, I think it is incredibly close. I think Ferrari have been the better car in the second half of the season. I do think that Mercedes have shown their consistency. I think Mercedes, the only thing really running in their favor is they've shown constantly this year that they are able to just kind of pick up some points even when they don't really deserve it. Interesting in the poll, though. Very, very interesting. I think the fact that the Mercedes drivers are fighting between themselves is a huge influence on this vote. I'm going to show you, by going the wrong way, I'm going to show you that I personally went for Mercedes to finish second just. I think it's going to be so close. I think it's going to be so incredibly close between Ferrari and Mercedes, but I've edged Mercedes. It just feels like any other slip from Mercedes, to be fair, one more mistake from Mercedes and Ferrari will take it. But I just trust Mercedes' philosophy. I trust that Toto Wolff will have had a little chat with Lewis Hamilton and George Russell and been like, look, both of you, we're not fighting for championships. What are you doing? This is pointless between the two of you. Sort it out. And therefore, I just feel like Mercedes will edge it out just over the Ferraris. And they've got the upgrade coming in Austin as well. But you guys completely disagree with me. Half of you completely disagree with me. 9 votes, 5 for Ferrari, 4 for Mercedes. So it is right on the edge, this one. It's very, very close. It's exceptionally close between this lot. And I think that kind of seeps in to the next thing that we have to talk about and predict. I want to talk about this one here. I want to talk about Fernando Alonso and the battle for 4th to 8th. Now, I think it's a little bit harsh of me to maybe group Fernando Alonso in with this, because a 30-point swing from Carlos Sainz in 5 races would be very, very big. That would be Carlos Sainz finishing, podiums, and Fernando Alonso not getting any points, because Carlos Sainz has to get 6 points, or average 6 points more than Fernando Alonso. And Fernando Alonso generally picks up some points. You know what I mean? Like, Fernando Alonso finishes 7th, 8th, 9th quite a lot of the time. So it would be impressive for any of these drivers to get up into 4th place. And Fernando Alonso is definitely the benchmark this year, because he was so good in the first, 9 races, you can say. Canada was the last time he was on the podium, and he was absolutely phenomenal for those first 8, 9 races when the Aston Martin was really clicking. And actually, he's been really good since, because he's been battling hard. He's continually picked up points, and he's done so well to finish in the points in so many races this season. So I'm going to throw the poll up early this one. I feel like this is the way we should have done it. I'm going to throw the poll up now so you can have a little debate amongst yourselves. Oh, and then I'll go through. Oh, no, that's 4th place. Yes, no. That makes no sense. And then I'm going to show you my reasoning, and then I'll put my 5 in a tier list for you. Maybe, you know what? Let's put who finishes in 5th place. I think that's maybe a little bit of an interesting one. And we'll go Norris, Leclerc, Sainz, and Russell. Boom. Okay. Who finishes higher out of those 4? Norris, Leclerc, Sainz, Russell. I'll give that to you in the chat, and I'll give you a moment, because I just feel like Fernando Alonso, as I said, he's the benchmark for me this year. So good in those first 9 races. He's had a great year. He always seems to get the most out of the Aston Martin car. Feels like every single time he's in the Aston Martin, he gets every single thing out of it. But the Aston Martin car has dropped off. He's only picked up 46 points since Silverstone, which is a considerable drop-off. You think, Silverstone is about the halfway point of where we are right now. 46 since then means he had, 130 odd before that. So it's a considerable drop off of points for Fernando Alonso since Canada, since Silverstone. And, to be caught by any of these 5 drivers, they're going to have an incredible last 5 races. But let's delve into it. I think for me, the closest is Lando Norris. Because if you look at Lando Norris there, he just doesn't really deserve to be amongst these 5. Lando Norris had 12 points in Canada. So where Fernando Alonso was finishing on the podium again and again and again and again, Lando Norris had 12 points at that point in the season. He's picked up another 12 then in Austria, and that was the huge turning point, right? Picked up 12 points in Austria and now has 136. So 124 points in 9 races. 124 points in 9 races. So, we average that out. That's 13 points per race weekend. Another 5 race weekends, let's say 70 points. That puts him on 206 points, Lando Norris. 206 points he could finish the season with. I think if Lando Norris gets over 200 points, and you're looking at Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Lewis Hamilton, and then possibly Lando Norris being the 4th and only driver to get over 200 points, that puts him in a really elite category. That puts you in a sensational category, especially if you take, Sergio Perez hasn't had a good season out of that. He's been thankfully in the best car and obviously won a couple of races towards the beginning of the season, which very much padded out Sergio Perez's points, like 50 points for 2 wins at the beginning of the season. And since then, hasn't been too great. If you put Lando Norris in that category of above 200 points, that means that he's in there with Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. That's an elite category to put yourself in, Lando. That is an exceptional season that you've had there. I know he is a little bit in his own head at the moment. I know that he is having a really tough time with thinking about his performances and being incredibly self-critical, especially because Oscar Piastri is looking quicker and quicker and quicker. And Oscar Piastri has had a really, really good rookie season to where he's getting a lot of plaudits and maybe people are taking their eye off Lando Norris just a little bit. But I think he has so much quality. He has the benefit of having the car that is closest to the Red Bull most often at the moment. So if you look at, the Ferraris, the Mercedes, they're probably going to be, the McLaren is probably going to be second or third fastest every single weekend. I think it will always be quicker than one of the Ferraris or the Mercedes. Because you look at Qatar, it would have been quicker than the Mercedes cars. It would have been quicker than the Ferrari cars, but maybe behind the Mercedes cars. And then the flip side of that, you look at Singapore, where Carlos Sainz won. He was slower than the Ferrari, but had the pace over the Mercedes and managed to beat out both the Mercedes cars. So it's the McLaren is one of those top three, and you assume that the top one is always Red Bull. He also has Oscar Piastri helping him out a little bit. I think that's the one thing here. Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, they're not helping each other out in any way. Lewis Hamilton is striving to that second place, and George Russell is trying to prove himself and get higher up on this list. So they're not really helping each other out. We're going to get to Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc in just a second, but they're not helping each other out. Whereas because Oscar Piastri isn't really in this battle, I know, there is that inter-team battle still, and Oscar Piastri will want to get as many points as possible. But if it comes down to the last couple of races of the season, and Lando Norris has a real opportunity at jumping up in this Drivers' Championship, I feel like Oscar Piastri might, give him a little bit of a hand. And even if he doesn't necessarily give him a little bit of a hand, he is also there taking points off people. Because, you think of Fernando Alonso finishing on the podium places. Lance Stroll wasn't, he was at the beginning, but then towards the middle of the season, Lance Stroll wasn't the driver just behind. He just wasn't the driver just behind. Whereas if he was, then that drops everyone else. It's a scatter effect. Because Oscar Piastri finishes just behind Lando Norris, then both Ferraris lose out on a couple of points because they drop down a little bit. George Russell drops down a little bit. Everyone drops down because Oscar Piastri is so good. And Oscar Piastri is really helping out Lando Norris here, because when Lando Norris picks up 18 points, that means Oscar Piastri picks up 15 rather than Carlos Sainz picking up 15. So it drops Carlos Sainz 3 points or Charles Leclerc 3 points. And it's just taking those tiny little chips away from everybody else when Oscar Piastri does do the job. And the McLaren setup just looks so good for the future, doesn't it? It looks like it could be contentious. It looks like in a couple of seasons' time, they might have an issue where Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are both fighting for, really solid points positions, and they are tricky. But I don't know. I think it's the one where Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, of the two of them, they're the two that really stand out pace-wise for me. Alonso and Sainz have a little bit of the ability to just pull out a performance and maybe do something a little bit. Hello on track, mate. How are you doing? Why am I not at work? Just got a little bit of time off. Oh dear. Anyway, should we move on to Ferrari? The last two Ferraris, again, Sainz and Leclerc right there, 153, 145. For me, it's a 50-50 as to which of these Ferraris finishes above the other. I just feel like it's going to be, a toss of a coin to whether Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc finishes one above the other. I think it does matter to them, though. I think it's one of those things where it's really easy to say, it doesn't really matter for the Ferraris, which of the two of them finishes slightly higher in the championship, because they both had really good years and they're both really tricky. But the winner, whoever comes out on top between these two, will go up 2-1 in the intra-team battle. Obviously, it's their third season together. Sainz got the benefit, then Leclerc, and now it's okay, which one is going to be the best driver overall and get the slight one up heading into 2024? I think if we can, we can leave this poll here. Actually, I'll show you the results of this poll because Lando Norris won by a little bit of a landslide here. 55% of the vote to Lando Norris. Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, interestingly second. So of this debate then, which of the two Ferraris will finish higher? You guys saying Carlos Sainz of the two, but I kind of want to get your ideas of just those two. So I'm going to take Lando Norris out of the equation, and I'm going to give you just the two Ferraris, and I want to know what I want to know. Who finishes higher? Sainz has an 8-point lead, or Leclerc? Have to remember, Sainz is also the only one without a win. Sorry, yeah, Sainz is the only one with a win, is what I meant to say. Big question. Do you think Aston Martin can rebuild and help Nando challenge? It's an interesting one. When it comes to this one, right? Like Sainz has so many less mistakes in him this season. I have been really impressed with Carlos Sainz and his consistency this year. And actually, I think, who just chucked that in the chat? Versatile. Absolutely spot on. Sainz has the racecraft, the consistency. Leclerc absolutely has the raw pace. Couldn't agree with that more. Exactly what my notes say. Like the work ethic since the summer break has been so incredible from Carlos Sainz. I think he did so much over the summer. You know, you look at the difference between how comfortable Carlos Sainz looked in the car at Silverstone or Canada or Austria, and then you compare that to how comfortable he looked in the car in the Netherlands, then in Monza, and then in Singapore where he gets that win. I think the change that Carlos Sainz has been able to push onto that team has been absolutely phenomenal and really, really impressive. I just think it's been a bit of a weird season for Ferrari in that it's usually the other way round with these two. Usually, it's Carlos Sainz who picks up points and trundles along and doesn't really get the headlines, but is still in and around his teammate by the end of the season. Where usually Charles Leclerc has those one-off phenomenal races, picks up poles, picks up podiums, picks up wins. It's actually kind of been the other way around. Especially since the summer break, Carlos Sainz has kind of stolen the headlines, especially in Monza when he got that podium. Obviously got the pole position there. Looked really, really impressive. Like everyone was talking about whether or not that Monza race, and you know, Carlos Sainz finally had the one up on Charles Leclerc. Was Carlos Sainz now the number one at Ferrari because he'd overcome Charles Leclerc on Italian soil? But then, on the other side of things, he also then won the race in Singapore. And it was like, oh, Carlos Sainz is the number one. He's done it again. He's built on it. He's built on it. Whereas usually that's like the Charles Leclerc argument. It's like Charles Leclerc has the one-off pace to just absolutely be electric. And, I mean, Charles Leclerc hasn't been at his best. Appears to be back onto his best, or at least getting towards his best, and maintain his kind of marginal advantage over Carlos Sainz. Leclerc is better on a one-off weekend, yes, but Carlos Sainz is still there. So it's still very interesting to me. And I like that of the 15 votes, 80% of you have gone for Carlos Sainz over Charles Leclerc. Carlos Sainz over Charles Leclerc. Interesting. And then the final kind of person to talk in all of this, George Russell, Georgie boy himself. How does this go for George Russell? He's on 132 points now. 13 off Charles Leclerc, 21 off Carlos Sainz. He's made this very difficult for himself. Like, he has chucked away a lot of points this year. Like, if you think about all of the performances, the obvious one is Singapore, crashing out from third place, losing out on 15 points, which would put him right amongst Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz in this battle. And 15 points is a huge swing for these drivers at this point in the season. And it is very, very frustrating that he's just not quite been able to get the performances under his belt. But he did also have a little blip in the middle of the season. Canada crashed all by himself. Like, I think back to that one. That one for me is the real, like, defining moment for George Russell this season almost. The fact that he crashed the car when he was completely alone effectively on track. I think that's a really tough pill for him to swallow. And then also a rough weekend in the Netherlands. He got that puncture late on with Lando Norris and the contact with Lando Norris. Hamilton obviously cost him points in Qatar as well. I just feel like for me, he probably should be 5th already. You know what I mean? Like, actually, if you reflect on the points that he's lost this season, he could easily be 5th in the standings right now. He could easily have an extra 25 points. I think that's fairly, like, unquestionable to say. He could have easily had an extra 25 points. I had those 3 races, Canada, Netherlands, and Singapore, in my mind, are the 3 where he really, really missed out, which is why I'm so skeptical when I make my predictions, because I can show you the overall. And again, this was one that I ummed and ahed over quite a lot. I ummed and ahed over it, and I'm still not 100% sure, but I've gone for this. I've gone for Lando Norris. I genuinely believe in him. A little touch of McLaren bias. I mean, I am a McLaren fan. I'm allowed a little touch of McLaren bias every now and then. But I also think of these 5 drivers right now on track, Lando Norris is the closest to winning a race. And 25 points would be absolutely massive for any of these drivers. I know that Carlos Sainz has already got a victory this season, but Lando Norris picking up a victory now when it really matters, right at the kind of crunch point of the season, I think would be exceptionally good for Lando Norris. And I think he might. I think he might pick up a victory. I can see in these last 5 races him having at least an opportunity. Whether or not he gets in his own head, whether or not he makes a little mistake, that's down to him. And I think it will really, really hurt him if he loses out on another possible victory again. But I don't think he will. I think he'll hold on. I think he'll get his first victory in Formula 1. I think 25 points would be a huge, huge swing. Alonso, I feel like we'll just have enough kind of 8th place finishes. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like he'll have a good enough season or end to the season where he picks up, I don't know, maybe, like a 7th, 8th, 9th, 7th, 6th. And it would just be like just enough points to hold off Carlos Sainz in 6th place. Carlos Sainz, just because of that win, I still think 30 points to Fernando Alonso is too much. Like, averaging 6 points over Fernando Alonso every single weekend will be really, really difficult. And therefore, I'm going to stick him in 6th place. I do think that Carlos Sainz will just about edge over Charles Leclerc. I think Charles Leclerc will come to life towards the end of the season, but I think Carlos Sainz will just have the consistency. And you feel like, Qatar, where he had the did not start, Charles Leclerc could have really made up some points there. Didn't make up a huge chunk of points. Also, Lewis Hamilton dropping out of the race kind of helped out Charles Leclerc even more there, and it still wasn't a massive swing in his favour. And Charles Leclerc just hasn't been his electrifying best, I would say, but has been good enough. So I think Charles Leclerc will just about miss out to Carlos Sainz, and it will be really close. And actually, Charles Leclerc, if I'm right, in the Drivers' Championship, has only been ahead of Carlos Sainz after Belgium. I think Carlos Sainz has been ahead in every single other race in terms of the driver's standings, apart from Belgium, which was the summer break. So Charles Leclerc was ahead at the summer break, which now makes me... See, this is the thing. I think it's so close between the 2 Ferraris. I think it is really, really close. It is a bit of a coin flip. And then George Russell, I know he had the mid-season blip. As I said, he lost so many points in those 3 races in particular. He's now 20 points off Carlos Sainz rather than... Well, he could have been 5 points off Carlos Sainz had he stuck to that 3rd place in Singapore. I've dropped him into the bottom. I think it's maybe a little bit harsh. He's had a weird season as George Russell. And the problem is, I just feel like this weird season has one more twist in the tail. It has one more like either Lewis Hamilton, George Russell collision or George Russell incident where he hits into somebody or causes a collision. I don't know. I just feel like there's one more weird change, weird thing that happens. And therefore, I'm worried for George Russell. And I think an 8th place finish, I think is disappointing for him. Really, really disappointing for him. But where I'm going to slot him, I think, again, I feel like he could jump the Ferraris. If the Mercedes car's really quick, he could jump the Ferraris. But I'm gonna settle on that as my prediction. I'm gonna say that's what it is. The next one is Aston Martin and McLaren. Now, this seems inevitable. It does seem inevitable. And you'll be saying to yourself, why on earth has he chucked this in? Pointless. Pointless to predict this. Obviously, McLaren are going to overcome Aston Martin. You know, Aston Martin started the year as the second fastest car to Red Bull. McLaren started the year last in the constructor standings. We have to remember, McLaren had 0 points until Australia. 0 points from the first 2 races of the season. And as I said, Lando Norris was so far off of Fernando Alonso. Lando Norris only had 12 points by Austria. And yet, we are now talking about the McLarens easily taking over Aston Martin. And McLaren have come alive post-Austria. The gap between them was 146 points after Austria. It's now 11. You know, if we talk about kind of the 9 races, as I said, as the halfway point of what we've seen so far this season, we've got 5 more left to go. The McLaren car has been the better car for more races. Because 9 races were in Aston Martin's favour, or 8 races, 9 races were in Aston Martin's favour. We're then talking about, 13 being in McLaren's favour. So McLaren have had the better car for the better part of the season. So it's inevitable that McLaren go on to take over Aston Martin in the standings. But the reason this is very interesting to talk about is because if you think about McLaren taking over Aston Martin and possibly even having an eye on Ferrari, the real defining factor in all of this is the fact that McLaren have 2 fantastic drivers. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri here are absolutely brilliant. They are just sensational drivers and some of the best drivers. I would put both of them in my top 6. I'd say that quite comfortably. I'd put both of them in my top 6 of how they have performed so far this season. Aston Martin only have 1 driver that is really putting in the performances, and I feel like that has come to fruition for them. And the fact that McLaren have been able to overcome them has not just come down to the fact that they have had the better car for longer. It's also that when Aston Martin did have the better car, they didn't take every single ounce of points out of it. You know, I talk about McLaren, the fact that Mercedes, talk about Mercedes and the fact that Mercedes never really looked like they had the best car on the grid. Or even the second best car on the grid for a lot of the time, but they took every single point they could out of most weekends. Hamilton in particular has been really good this year at just taking the maximum amount of points away from a weekend that he possibly can, outside of Qatar. But Aston Martin haven't been able to do that. And that's why I want to talk about Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll saving his season in the last 5 races. Can he save his season? Because if we look at it, Fernando Alonso has taken points from 16 out of 17 Grand Prix weekends. Fernando Alonso has only finished outside of the points once for the entire season. Lance Stroll only has 47 points. Fernando Alonso has 183. Lance Stroll hasn't finished amongst the top 10 since Belgium. Hasn't finished amongst the top 10 in this second half of the season post-summer break. So it's just like, how on earth do we actually get to this point where Lance Stroll has had such a bad last 5 races? Like, we look at his last 5 races, 11th, 16th, did not start, 18th, 11th in his last 5. If he does that again, that is another 0 points in the next 5 races. That is absolutely crazy to me. What's up? How are you doing? I'm good, thank you. Oh, you're not talking to me. Well, Does this guy ever read the chat? I do, but you know, I'm going on a point. I'm going on a tangent. Developing the car until the last race, so I'm predicting a win. I just don't know for Aston Martin. I just don't know. Crazy because Hamilton and Russell should have been much better pairing, but they're not working together as well. That is very true. The Hamilton-Russell pairing is also another one where you can say, actually, Mercedes, the reason that they are where they are in the standings, the reason that Mercedes has been able to kind of almost hold on to second place is because their drivers have been really good, but they also haven't got the best out of all of the weekends. So it's a weird one. But yeah, I think the Lance Stroll situation, if he repeats his form in the last 5 races, in the next 5 races, that means he's going to end the season with 47 points, which is pretty damning for Lance Stroll. And I think the problem that he also then has is the impact that has on the team around him. Like the team around him, there are a lot of team-related bonuses that are directed towards where they finish in the constructors' standings. There are a lot of people working for Aston Martin who are regular people who, you know, pay their mortgage and earn a reasonable living for working at Aston Martin, who would have got a huge bonus had they finished in 4th place in the constructor standings, and now will get a lot less of a bonus when they finish in 5th place in the constructor standings. That's how a lot of these Formula One teams work. The finances are directed by the constructor standings, whereas like the accolades are more to do with the driver's standings. So, you know, the team want Lance Stroll to do so much better, and they are trying their best to get the best out of Lance Stroll, but it's just Lance Stroll. Like, he doesn't. Well, obviously, you see him shove his trainer, right? So if he is like that to the people behind the scenes at Aston Martin, the people at Aston Martin will be hating Lance Stroll at the minute because he's costing them money in their bonuses and in their salary. Lance Stroll seemingly doesn't get on with a lot of the people behind the scenes at Aston Martin, and nobody can really talk to each other because they have to tiptoe around him. And it feels like they do tiptoe around him. You know, Mike Crack should have come out straight away after that incident in Qatar and been like, that is not how we treat people. We are behind the scenes at Aston Martin going to absolutely lambast Lance Stroll and, you know, get rid of him. Or not get rid of him, but, you know, talk to him, say that we don't treat people like that, sort him out, give him a punishment, etc., etc., etc. But they didn't. They kind of baby stepped around the whole situation. And, you know, that's because he is, unfortunately, the son of one of the owners. And therefore, they don't really want to be like, we're going to absolutely throw the book at Lance Stroll. Because if Mike Crack throws the book at Lance Stroll gets really pissed off with him. Lance Stroll then goes to his dad and is like, you know what? This Mike Crack guy isn't doing a great job. Then Mike Crack loses his job. So it's like he can't really win and nobody can actually help Lance Stroll. And it's just getting to the point where it's spiraling for him. And I probably think he'll get a few more points somewhere. But is it enough to change the narrative? Is there enough points available for him to really change the narrative around what's happening to him and his season and the problems that he has behind the scenes? And obviously the gap to Alonso is only going to get bigger. I don't think that the gap is going to get smaller. It's just so hard for Lance Stroll. I think he'll obviously be there in 2024. But I'd love to get your thoughts, actually. Lance Stroll in 2025. Is he in F1 or not? Because for me, I just can't see a turning point. I can't understand where he does, where he finds that turning point for himself and how Aston Martin kind of justify him being in there. And I think the final kind of domino to fall is actually the impact that the Lance Stroll situation will have on Alpine, which is kind of a weird one, obviously, because Aston Martin and Alpine have kind of been at each other quite a lot in recent years or in the last couple of years. Obviously, Otmar came over, and then they had the debate with Fernando Alonso, and they nicked Fernando Alonso off Alpine. So these two have kind of been at war with one another quite a bit. But the Lance Stroll situation could have a massive impact on the Gasly Ocon situation. The Gasly Ocon situation to me is a really interesting one right now because Lance Stroll, 10th place, 47 points. Gasly just 1 point off, and then Ocon 3 points off. So there's 3 points separating these three drivers in the Drivers' Championship. And for me, it's going to be so interesting. Let's see what you guys think in terms of Lance Stroll. Not in Formula One. The majority vote is not in Formula One. So Lance Stroll, unfortunately, pack your bags, mate. What about then this situation? Gasly versus Ocon. Who wins between Gasly and Ocon? Like who finishes higher? Gasly, who currently has the lead, or Ocon, who's just behind? Because the reason this impacts Stroll so much is because if Gasly and Ocon, who are both desperate to beat each other, do manage to finish above Lance Stroll, I think Lance Stroll finishing 12th in the standings and basically worst out of the top 6 teams when Fernando Alonso is probably going to finish 4th or 5th. It is a huge, huge thing for Lance Stroll if he finishes literally worst out of the top 6 teams. Like, you're only then talking about Williams, Haas, Alfa Romeo, and Alfa Tauri, who are just behind. Thank you so much, Finn. Appreciate the subscription there. But yeah, if you're talking about Lance Stroll, those 8 drivers behind would be just ridiculous to finish only in 12th place. Hello, Kingston, mate. Hello, Kingston. But yeah, I think neither is... Let's talk about Gasly and Ocon outside of just Lance Stroll and the fact that Lance Stroll will have an impact on this. Neither of Esteban Ocon or Pierre Gasly is particularly desirable, I would say, to any of the bigger teams. You know what I mean? Like, I can't see Gasly or Ocon moving to Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, or even McLaren or Aston Martin. I can't see either of these two making that move. So I think they're kind of stuck. I think both of them have come to the conclusion that Alpine, at this moment in time, the way that the season has panned out and the way that the championship is right now, and the way that, you know, all of this has gone for them over the course of their entire careers, they're stuck at Alpine for at least another few years, probably until 2026, and there might be some dramatic changes that happen and maybe they can reshuffle somebody else. But they're kind of stuck where they are. Ocon is in a situation where he probably coming into this season, the fact that Fernando Alonso left, I think he would have seen Fernando Alonso and that news that Fernando Alonso was leaving and think, absolutely brilliant. Now I'm the number one at Alpine, because he's had to play second fiddle to Alonso. He was also second to Daniel Ricciardo, realistically, wasn't he, Esteban? So I feel like Esteban Ocon coming into this year was like, I'm finally the number one. This is my team, boys. Gasly, however, has come in. He's finally got out of the shadow of what happened at Red Bull. I think, you know, he's done really well at Alpha Tauri. He was so quick in that Alpha Tauri car in 2021. Okay, the car really wasn't there for him in 2022, but 2021 in particular, I think of that season with Gasly in the Alpha Tauri, and I was so impressed with him, but he was never, ever going to be able to get to that Red Bull seat. So I think for him, it was really disappointing that whatever he did at Alpha Tauri didn't really help his career move forward in any way. He needed a step, and he needed to step away and go to a team. And I think it's maybe frustrating for Gasly, where in Alpha Tauri, he was the clear number one. Now he's had to come in here and he's had to try and, you know, displace Esteban Ocon. And he wants to prove Red Bull wrong. He wants to prove everybody wrong. Like, Pierre Gasly has the desire behind him that he's like, actually, Red Bull was so wrong to kick me out of that car. And I want to prove them. I want to prove to them that they really shouldn't have kicked me out of that car. But I think it's going to be so close. It's going to be so incredibly close between the two of them. It's so, so close, isn't it? My prediction on the 10th to 12th positions, you guys have gone for Esteban Ocon. You guys have gone for Esteban Ocon in the poll. 70% went for Esteban Ocon. I also went for Esteban Ocon. I also went for Esteban Ocon as well. I'm glad we're on the same page. But it's very interesting. I do think Ocon and Gasly finish above Lance Stroll. I do think Ocon and Gasly both finish above Lance Stroll. I genuinely feel like it's another one where Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc was like similar for me in the Ferrari car, where it's very 50-50 between Ocon and Gasly. I think it's very close between the two of them. Ocon, I would say, has been the slightly better Alpine driver this year. But I think that's to be expected, considering Esteban Ocon has had more experience of that Alpine car, and obviously got to drive it in 2022 as well, where it was kind of this new generation of Formula One car. Obviously lost out a lot where it wasn't his fault, I would say, Esteban Ocon. I'm thinking of like Singapore when he came to a stop, and that completely wasn't his fault. And that would already give him enough points to be ahead of Pierre Gasly in the standings. I just think Esteban Ocon has been better, but more unlucky. Whereas Gasly has something about him, to be fair. Like, I think Ocon definitely has the consistency and has maybe been a little bit unlucky. But Pierre Gasly just has that little bit of electricity about him. It's just got something. He feels a little bit less reliable than Esteban Ocon, as I said. But if it clicks with Pierre Gasly, just feel like he can get a really good result. Just feel like he can absolutely fly. I know Esteban Ocon has that podium this season in Monaco, which does obviously massively help, but Gasly got a podium as well in the sprint. It's very, very close between the two of them. And Stroll, I just can't see this spiral of poor form coming to a stop anytime soon. As I said, he and the team and the dynamic just feels so weird right now. Doesn't feel like anything is meshing for Lance Stroll. And therefore, I think it just continues to spiral a little bit. As I said, I think Lance Stroll will pick up some points at some point in these last 5 races. I don't think he's going to go this entire 10-race stint after the summer break without picking up any points whatsoever. But his head is all over the place. He's driving with so much emotion right now. And yeah, I think Ocon and Gasly will be better than Stroll. And I think Ocon will just edge it out in terms of the driver standings from Lance Stroll and Pierre Gasly. Final prediction then. We have been live for an hour already. Wow, that's gone very, very quickly. Thank you so much for everybody who's involved. Leave a like, subscribe if you're new as well. If you subscribe, you'll get a little thing. It'll come up here. It'll be nice. But final prediction for you then. 7th place. 7th place. It means a lot. It means a lot to these teams. We've got Williams there right now. Then we've got Alfa Romeo, who have just recently snuck in. We've then also got Haas, who, you know, depending on how Austin goes, could be a little bit different. And then we've got AlphaTauri as well. I'll start the poll now. I'm going to give you my thoughts and feelings, and we'll see if we agree once again on who is going to finish in 7th place in the standings between these lot. Because as I said, there's millions of pounds on the line of prize money at stake. I think the difference between finishing 7th and 10th is transformative. It's, as I said, tens of millions of pounds for these teams. The difference that could make, particularly because we've taken into account the new capital expenditure spending. So in recent weeks, they've basically changed it so that there is a capital expenditure limit for the top teams that is slightly lower than the capital expenditure for these smaller teams at the bottom. To basically hope to get the factories of these lower teams up to a point where they can at least somewhere, you know, in terms of their infrastructure and in terms of the upgrading and how quickly they can get upgrades onto the car, they can slightly start to catch up with the real big boys. Ooh, Lance Stroll to WEC. Oh, I love that. Love that shout. Anyway, but then if we look at this and like try and predict, this one actually took me the most time to predict. I know that we've had some difficult ones, you know, which of the Ferraris is going to be better, which of the Alpines is going to be better. It's tricky. But this one took me the most time to try and predict, because potentially this could be totally swung by one of these teams getting exceptionally lucky. Like if it rains in Brazil, or there's a safety car in Abu Dhabi or in Las Vegas, right? If there's a well-timed safety car for one of these teams, this could be just a huge swing. It could completely go the other way. And it's so difficult to predict this. Williams right now, obviously currently in 7th place, 23 points. We look at them though. Albon has all 23 of those points. Logan Sargent still on 0 points. Still on 0 points. And Williams has a couple of tracks coming up that will really suit them. And actually, they've been able to survive a couple of tracks that recently really haven't suited them. And I think the Alex Albon hype right now is incredibly high. Williams should be out of sight. Let's face this, right? Alex Albon has been absolutely brilliant this season. Williams have found pace at the correct circuits, and they've been able to put together performances when they've needed to. They've been able to get the best out of that Williams car when they've needed to and pick up the points where they can. You know, it's been incredibly difficult for any of these bottom 4 teams to really get into the points consistently. Alex Albon is the only driver you could say that has been able to really do that on a fairly consistent basis, that he's been able to really deliver. And if Alex Albon had a second driver that even just had a handful of points, imagine Logan Sargent had 5 points, 8 points. I feel like that would be enough for Williams to just be out of sight at this point. But Logan Sargent is still trying to save his seat. He's got 0 points at this moment in time. He's hanging on by the slightest of threads. And the fact that he is obviously a Williams rookie, they're giving him every chance to get a second season in Formula One in that second Williams seat. And he will stay until the end of the season. So we're going to have at least 5 more races of Logan Sargent. But his performances, it does feel like since the summer break, he's actually getting worse, which is really, really tough to say. Because I thought, you know, he'd have had the first 12 races of the season. He'd come out of it. There was some good. There was some bad. There was some indifferent. But okay, he's got the summer break now. He'd really knuckle down after the summer break and really go for it. It hasn't quite happened. I think, if anything, his performances post-summer break have actually got worse because of the pressure that's been on him. The pressure is getting bigger and bigger. His performances, therefore, are getting worse and worse. And similar to what we're seeing with Lance Stroll, it's a spiral effect. You know, he gets a bad performance, so he gets more pressure. So he has a worse performance. He gets even more pressure. He gets a worse performance, gets even more pressure. And it's just going to continue in that cycle for him. And he's falling apart. And the only driver not to take any points, to take part in every single race this season. Obviously, Daniel Ricciardo and Nick De Vries also don't have any points, but he's the only driver to have taken part in every single race and not have any points on the board. And the other thing is, he also just hasn't been close enough to Alex Albon at any point. Hasn't been close enough to Alex Albon when it's mattered. There's been a couple of races where you could say, oh, he's finished just behind Alex Albon, but it's when they're like 18th, 19th. When Alex Albon has been in the points, when Alex Albon has delivered in that Williams car, he has been nowhere near close enough, in my opinion. I think the only thing that really rolls in Logan Sargent's favour is if you look at the choices that are out there for Logan Sargent, or the Logan Sargent replacement, they're pretty minimal. They're pretty minimal, aren't they? Because, you know, Liam Lawson's the one that's talked about, but I think AlphaTauri will want to hold on to him in case they need to get rid of Sergio Perez. Like, if they have to really quickly get rid of Sergio Perez, promote Daniel Ricciardo, they'll want to keep Liam Lawson around to put Liam Lawson in that seat. Because if Liam Lawson's then at Williams and they have to go to Williams and have to say, oh, can we have our driver back? And they're like, no, we signed him for a season. He signed this contract. And then AlphaTauri have to go and find someone. That puts them in a really sticky situation. And I think the other driver that's being linked is Mick Schumacher. Whether or not Williams will really want to risk Mick Schumacher. It's like, is Mick Schumacher that good that he's worth kind of chucking into that secondary seat? And then on top of that, like, Williams, okay, if they don't go for Lawson or Schumacher, they have to go for another unproven talent, like Logan Sargent was, and Logan Sargent wasn't good enough. So it's really tricky for Williams to find a replacement, which I think does play in Logan Sargent's favour. But I think Logan Sargent is a really key point when looking at 7th place here. Let's move on to Alfa Romeo, because Alfa Romeo as a team, the team that I probably talk about the least, I would say. I think the team that I talk about the least because they're in this weird transitional season. There's not really been much going on at Alfa Romeo this year. And neither driver is insanely good or insanely bad. Like Valtteri Bottas, 10 points. Zhou Guanyu, 6 points. They both had fairly good parts of the season. They both had fairly poor parts of the season. But I would say that both drivers have done enough to justify the fact that they are staying for the 2024 season. And Alfa Romeo appears like they found some all-round pace recently. Not to the extent where I'm like, oh, they could really battle for like, I don't know, 8th or 9th place every single race. But they could battle for 8th or 9th place every now and again. And that's all you really need to do when you are a backmarker team like Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, and Haas. If you can get an 8th or a 9th place, just like one every 3-4 races, you take that. You absolutely take that. And it just feels for me like Alfa Romeo are missing that consistency. They haven't had consistency in a very long time. They really are lacking an ability to put a car into a window and then hold it in that window. Like Valtteri Bottas has put in some incredible performances and jumped up, but they haven't been able to hold that window a lot of the time. And I feel like both drivers will get more points this season. I feel like Alfa Romeo will be able to find a little bit of performance. Like Bottas in Mexico last year pulled out a miracle performance. That was absolutely brilliant. Maybe Bottas can do that again in Mexico this year. Maybe he does really like that track. But I can't see any like earth-shattering points hauls for Alfa Romeo. So the real thing with Alfa Romeo here is whether or not you think the two drivers that they've got can find just enough pace to be able to really haul the Alfa Romeo towards the Williamses. Haas completely ruined this prediction for me. I have no idea how good Haas are going to be. This all depends on how potent that Haas upgrade is. Thank you, Toads. Thank you, Toads. It all depends on how good this upgrade is from Haas. I think Haas are impossible to predict right now. They're so difficult to really judge. And we're starting to see like pictures of the new look Haas. Obviously, it's the Red Bull concept that they're moving towards. And Haas, as ever, are last to the party here. But I do trust Haas when they upgrade stuff. You know, even though they're last to move towards this Red Bull concept, they've kind of waited patiently on it. And they always seem to be good when they have a new car. Like I'm thinking at the beginning of 2022, they looked really quick. Kevin Magnussen put in some performances, got a really good points haul. I'm thinking at the beginning of this season, Nico Hülkenberg looked really quick. Nico Hülkenberg put in some good performances, put in some points on the board. Like Haas, whenever they turn up to the new season and they have a new car, they look really good. So maybe they're just turning up with a new car midway through the season and they're still going to look really good. Because like Hülkenberg has been very consistent this year, especially when it's come to qualifying. If they can just turn that qualifying pace into a little bit of race pace, that'll be really impressive for the team. And Haas do occasionally thrive in the chaos. Like Hülkenberg earlier on in the season, as I mentioned, nearly got a podium in Australia. And then Kevin Magnussen with a pole position in Brazil last year. Like Haas are so unpredictable, it's ridiculous. Like there's just nothing you can really go off of for Haas. You just have to be like, they'll turn up. Whether they'll be good or bad, we have zero idea. So Haas really messed with my predictions here. Whereas AlphaTauri, the team currently in 10th, 5 points all season, 7 points off of Haas. So they need to double and a bit just to catch Haas in 9th place, let alone the 18 points between them and Williams. Like, the absolute driver madness that AlphaTauri have had. 4 drivers, only 2 of them have scored points this season. Tsunoda with 3, Lawson with 2 are the 2 drivers that have picked up points. Daniel Ricciardo and Nick De Vries have left out because they don't have any points on the board this season. Like, Yuki Tsunoda has been cursed since the summer break as well. Obviously, didn't get to take part in Monza, didn't get to take part in Singapore, both completely out of his, completely out of his hands. It's just like, AlphaTauri, everything that probably could have gone wrong kind of has gone wrong for them this season. Daniel Ricciardo back in. I don't know who put it in the chat. I'm really sorry. But Daniel Ricciardo, who put it coming back in, is indeed the X factor. Quan said, Daniel Ricciardo is AlphaTauri's X factor. I completely agree. If Daniel Ricciardo comes back in, and we were saying this because we didn't really get to see him at full force. We got to see him just before the summer break for a couple of Grand Prix where he'd been rushed back into an AlphaTauri. Then he spent the entire summer break really working hard. He spent the entire summer break getting himself back into the realms of performance. We come back to the first race after the summer break and he gets injured. So we don't actually know how good Daniel Ricciardo is going to be. We don't know where Daniel Ricciardo is at right now. And therefore, he is the X factor. He's a little bit like Haas. He is the unpredictability that comes with this AlphaTauri team. And AlphaTauri surely should be destined for 10th place. Like, you can't have a season where you have 4 different drivers and come away with it and still be best of the rest in this kind of weird slot towards the bottom of the grid and finish in 7th place. Surely you can't have that chaotic of a season and still come out on top of Williams, Alfa Romeo and Haas. That would just be obscene if they were able to do it. But Daniel Ricciardo is the weird factor here. So I just don't know. In terms of my prediction, I'm agreeing with you. I've gone for Williams at the top as well. Alfa Romeo, 9% of you voted. Haas got 23% of the vote. I feel like Haas are the one, aren't they? They are the unpredictability, and then AlphaTauri 9% as well. I went for Williams, Haas, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri. So I'm pretty much agreeing with you, saying that I think Williams will be there. I think Alex Albon has just done enough this season to justify Williams getting 7th place. And I think he'll basically one man 7th place for Williams. I think that's how good he has been this season. Haas, I do think that these upgrades are going to be okay. I'm 50-50 about it. Yesterday in my predictions for the Austin Grand Prix, I was really worried about it. Now I've seen the car and I've heard the team talk about it a little bit more. I'm a little bit more positive about it. That could change come Sunday if we see the Haas car just, completely nowhere. I think then I'll change my mind a little bit about this. But the Haas upgrades, I'm just going to bump them up a little bit. Alfa Romeo, as I said, I can see them getting a couple of results. Maybe a good race in Vegas. A good race in Mexico probably as well for Alfa Romeo. I feel like Alfa Romeo will just about do it. And yeah, AlphaTauri, they just can't, right? AlphaTauri surely can't have this bad of a season and still manage to finish not in 10th place. Like AlphaTauri, I think they finished their short stint in Formula One with a last place. AlphaTauri been around for 3 years. That's enough. Last place, get you off the grid, rename you into something else, and then Red Bull have themselves another junior team for the future. But there we are. What am I doing? Closing this chat. That's what I was doing. End the poll. Williams in 7th place. Haas, Alfa Romeo, and AlphaTauri in last place. What a stream it has been. I thought this was going to be about 40 minutes. It's been about double that, 1 hour and 20. We've had a wonderful little chat. You guys have been trying to work out who's the best Alfa Romeo driver ever, which I've been kind of dipping in and out of. Ericsson, Giovinazzi, Joe. I have got a video coming out about that. Don't you worry. But what a stream and what a lot to look forward to. Am I right? Austin, Mexico, Brazil, Las Vegas, Abu Dhabi. There is so much to look forward to in these last 5 races. Doesn't matter that Max Verstappen has already won the championship. Boring. I cannot wait for these last 5 races. And also, I just want to thank all of you guys for everything recently. The channel is flying at this moment in time. We're getting more views on videos than I've ever seen in my entire life. We are getting more views on shorts recently. Just a lot of people finding the channel, clicking in and becoming part of this community. And I do absolutely love the community that we have here. Like the way that I can just talk to you guys during qualifying, during the sprints, during the races. Obviously, I'm going to be live for all of those this weekend and throughout the rest of the season. The fact that you guys have given me an opportunity to be on things like the last lap and meet people in the space, like the fact that I got to meet Law and James and Tomo and have worked with Niran in the past. So many people, like the fact that I've met Taron and who's on track, if you don't know, like just the incredible things that have come from this. And all of that is down to you. So I want to say thank you so much recently. As I said, I will be live in like 3-4 hours time for qualifying for the Austin Grand Prix. So I'll talk to you a little bit more when we get to that. But yeah, thank you all so much. So many videos to come, so many in the pipeline. Obviously, 5 races to go this season. I'll be keeping you updated across the entire off season as well. And yeah, absolutely love it. I will see you all very soon. And well, I'll see you in a couple of hours. Thank you.